most of us would have already become familiar with the issues of gender in relation to the church, given that the theme for 2020 was church and gender sexuality. So nevertheless, it will be helpful to briefly clarify the notion of gender once again before we turn to patriarchy. We would have already noted that gender is a fluid term that transcends biological sex, and it is regarded as a social construct whose definition varies in subtle ways from one culture to another. So when we talk about gender in a particular culture, the way it's constructed may be different in another culture, and it's not about biological sex or whether somebody is male or female. It is a social construction, as we have heard in the previous talk about stereotypes of women or men. Men are strong, they don't cry, women are emotional and all that. All those are factors that come into play when gender is constructed in a particular society. So it's, however, simplistic to say that gender is solely a social construct, as researchers have also acknowledged that biological differences in brain structure, brain functioning, and hormones are also contributing factors in making gender distinction. It is easy to establish a causal relationship between patriarchy and gender disparity in the church. But the operation of patriarchy in the church environment is informed largely by lopsided interpretations of the text, as well as the larger patriarchal culture of the society in general. In highly patriarchal societies, where society is stratified along gender lines, with males occupying dominant and leadership positions, the tendency is that elements and operations of culture will flow into the church. Feminist scholars have noted arguably that patriarchy is the ultimate cause of all abuse against women. Patriarchy is seen as the overarching social construct which ultimately engenders abuse. Although one may say that individuals need to take responsibility for their actions, it is also logical to argue that to the extent that patriarchy creates the enabling environment for abuse to occur and thrive, it is a causal factor in gender disparity and abuse. Such abuse then should encompass issues that arise from gender injustices everywhere, including the church. So what is patriarchy? There is no doubt that today the term patriarchy carries with it some heavy negative connotations. Patriarchy refers to male rule and hence male authority, and it describes a very broad continuum of gender role models in which males have some type of gender-based authority over females. So the central issue here is power, authority, dominance, control. Patriarchy is about male power over females. But like gender, it is also a product of culture, which means that the manifestations of patriarchy are also determined by the particular culture that operates the patriarchy. So what is patriarchy in the other culture may not be exactly the same in the Afrikaner culture, for instance. And you know, some cultures are matrilineal or matriarchal, so to say. So the patriarchy in such cultures will be different from cultures that are patrilineal and seriously patriarchal. So Hegel explains that the inherent logic of patriarchy says that if men have the right to power and control over women and children, they also have the right to enforce that control. Domination and glorification of violence are characteristics of patriarchal societies. In patriarchy, women and children are defined in relation to men who control the resources and the power. Women and children are the other, the object. Men are the norm, the subject. In a dominance and submission social order, there is no true mutual care. Subordinates are to care for the needs of the dominants because, of course, they are in power. Unavoidably, This view and practice of patriarchy are also observable in the church, where patriarchy is legitimized by traditional chauvinistic interpretations of the canonical text. Patriarchy in the church, I would say, has historical antecedents. More simplistically, one could say that patriarchy is the rule of the fathers, and nowhere else is this historically manifested than in the early church terminologies, such as the early church fathers, or great church fathers, or early apostolic fathers. One would wonder, where were the early church mothers? Was the early church a single parent church that had only fathers but no mothers? The strictly traditional patriarchal teachings in the church buttress patriarchal ideals into which men have already been socialized in the society. Patriarchy in the church feeds on cultural norms and ideals. Tracy observes that, and I quote, when men come into conservative Protestant churches, for the most part, they are going to hear some form of patriarchal gender views, that is, male headship. For men who are significantly insecure, immature, and or misogynistic, patriarchal teaching of any form may merely serve to confirm their views of male superiority and their right to dominate women. This dynamic is particularly true for men who are not well integrated into the church and regularly exposed to biblical teaching, quote ends. What this means then is that in many of our churches, patriarchy operates as a two-pronged instrument, you know, like you have that two-pronged fork that you use to pick meat or something. The one side dictated by culture and cultural practices, and the other side informed by church tradition and lopsided interpretations of the Bible by men. The influence of patriarchy in the church then tends to become stronger than even outside the church, where culture alone may be the determinant factor in patriarchal practices. In the church, patriarchy feeds not only on cultural norms, but on androcentric scriptural interpretations as well. It is significant to note that scholarship also distinguishes between traditional patriarchy and what is considered soft patriarchy. That is a form of patriarchy which de-emphasizes male authority and control, defines male headship in terms of loving, sacrificial service to one's family, and leaves this out in terms of joint decision-making, shared parenting, and shared domestic duties. But even then, the power is still not balanced. So NADA classifies this under the rubric of a theology of headship and submission. In other words, soft patriarchy promotes shared authority, but the reality is that even in that form of patriarchy, unequal distribution of power still operates. Although strictly traditional patriarchy grants men unbridled access to power over women, thereby encouraging women to submit to men's headship, I would argue that irrespective of the form, whether traditional or soft, patriarchy remains a system that promotes male power and interest, leaving women and children vulnerable and undervalued. What therefore ties both gender and patriarchy together is power. We're talking about gender and patriarchy in the church. What ties the two, gender and patriarchy, together is the notion of power. Patriarchy engenders a disproportionate distribution of power that privileges men and promotes gender injustice in the context of ministry and church leadership. Patriarchy creates and sustains gender hierarchies. It relegates women to the background and silences them in the church. It relegates them and other powerless groups to the pew and retains strong men in the pulpit. I put strong, you know. Men always think they are strong because of muscles, you know. But strength is not about muscles. Amen. Since I'm talking to pastors, you know. So it relegates them and other powerless groups to the pew and retains strong men in the pulpit and as church board members and trustees. The men control the finances of the church and make decisions on behalf of the majority. Ironically, women are said to be complicit in the perpetuation of patriarchy in the church, for most often refuse to vote other women in leadership elections. Women also sometimes help to promote gender stereotypical assumptions that portray women as weak, incompetent, or dependent on men. If power is central to the issues of patriarchal control and gender disparity in the church, then it makes sense that women's leadership in the church will be affected by these issues. And I would like to talk a little bit on that. The struggle for women's ordination has been won in many denominations which traditionally denounce the ordination of women, while some denominations remain adamant about not ordaining women. In Africa, however, some churches which have agreed in principle to allow women's ordination and participation in board membership have only 1 or 2 females in their leadership cadre. A 2012 report by Professor Hendricks here of the gender statistics in 12 churches and seminaries under the NECTACT network shows that gender representation in church offices and seminaries in those churches continue to be significantly in favor of men. In many churches, where there are updated policies on the role and treatment of women, the official position differs remarkably from the reality on the ground. The percentage of women that attend synod meetings is often negligible compared to that of men. Women continue to be sidelined in decision-making in denominations. Of course, this is not to deny that some changes are noticeable in some denominations, such as the Uniting Reformed Church, which in recent decade had a woman at the helm of affairs. According to Sekano and Misango, one of the reasons women are marginalized in church leadership in Africa, specifically in South Africa, is that many men, including clerics who serve under the leadership of women, claim to have a negative experience and feel degraded and traumatized by the encounter because their cultural norms and practices conflict with such leadership patterns. Taking orders from women in their view not only contradicts culture, it also violates the scriptural injunction that it is improper for women to speak in the church. How can women who are supposed to be silent in church even contemplate leading men? Women were expected to be silent in the church based on 1 Timothy 2:12 and 1 Corinthians 14:34 to 35, and to be in subjection to their own husbands, Ephesians 5:22. The attitude is, if women want to stop serving coffee and tea in church and desire to be ordained, we have no problem with it. They can attend synod meetings, they can be pastors and deaconesses, but we will still call the shots. The gender imbalance in church hierarchy in a way continues to be shaped by deep-rooted beliefs that women are not supposed to be heard and are not supposed to teach or hold leadership positions in the church. Scripture is used along with cultural norms to limit women even in denominations that allow ordination of women so that they are unable to reach the top. Even though some will not say it in the hearing of women, men still hold on to Apostle Paul's statement that the man is the head of the woman. It is okay if you and your spouse agree to this arrangement in your home, but that has nothing to do with church administration. The hierarchies that you have established in your home as a pastor should not be brought into church administration. For the same Apostle Paul explained that in Christ there is neither male nor female in Galatians 3:28. So if you want to be head over your home as a man, it is totally in order if you are in agreement with your wife over that. But that has nothing to do with church administration. So although many churches are adopting non-sexist approaches to administration, the reality is that at the top echelon, the traditional hegemonic paradigms are still firmly in place. In many congregations, men continue to make unilateral decisions that are informed by patriarchy and androcentrism and that do not take into account the needs and views of women. Such congregations have a long way to go. And by the way, I'm a pastor too. I'm a senior pastor over my congregation. And I fight systemic patriarchy too on other levels, not in my church, in my parish hierarchy, but in other hierarchies. It's still present, even though my church allows women's ordination and allows you to go far, but there are still some policies that favor men, you know. So in some instances, women are permitted to express their views. Such views are not taken seriously and are reduced to what men call women's talk, which they believe is colored by sentiments and emotions and is not based on logic and facts. And in democratic church settings, final decisions often rest on the church council or board, which is solely or predominantly constituted by men. The outcomes of their deliberations then reflect essentially male views. As long then as the most important decisions in the church are made mostly by men, the leadership structure also will continue to be skewed. It is lacking in gender representation and equality, and relegating women to playing minor leadership roles is a sign of structural defect. But the Bible remains a text of hope, and women in ministry need to continue in hope. Preaching the text as a woman can be, and it is, fulfilling. In another sense, the struggle is real for women in denominations which have opened their doors and considered that the Bible does support the idea of women in ministry. When women eventually become ordained, some of the married ones still have the Bible thrown in their face by husbands who insist that the women must submit to their authority in the house and still fully engage in household chores, which the men are unwilling to share. So, how do we grapple with this important issue of patriarchy, which affects primarily women in ways that will promote a healthy church? A first step in addressing the issue of patriarchy in relation to gender and society would be to identify ways in which patriarchy in the society feeds patriarchy in the church and vice versa. If we as pastors try to identify, subtle ways, little ways in which we bring culture, patriarchal culture outside into the church, and in which we use the Bible to make patriarchal interpretations and thereby subjugate women, then that will help us a lot. So, for example, I just want to give some of those little things that we take for granted. When a woman does all the house chores at home because she's classified socially as a housewife, the tendency is that the cleaning of toilets, serving tea during synod meetings, waiting on the so-called men of God and so forth will be reserved for her in the church, or even maybe because she's a domestic help somewhere. Then in church, you now tend to let her function in that same role. It's wrong. It's wrong. Why cannot men clean toilets and serve tea? So when a father walks his daughter down the aisle and hands her over in marriage to another man, a clear message is being sent that men hold the sway, not only at home, but also in the church. Why cannot the mother also walk the daughter down the aisle? Or why can't both parents walk the daughter down the aisle? So such little things, they send different messages that add up. In some church settings, the seating arrangement continues along gender lines. This invariably would reinforce gender disparity, as pews where men sit could be perceived as the base of power in the church. So women are ultimately underrepresented in the leadership strata of various congregations, especially in Africa, as research by Hendricks and Rutoro has shown. Statistics confirms that though women constitute the majority in most congregations, when it comes to leadership roles, there are minorities who play minoritized leadership roles in church, as lead vocalists in the choir, women's coordinator, children's Sunday school teachers, event planners, and so forth. Lead vocalists are women leaders are compared to Miriam, who led women in song and dance after the victory at the Red Sea in Exodus 15. But people refrain from highlighting the role of strong female leaders, such as Deborah in Judges 4-5, for fear that women today will begin to claim such roles. Thus, a second step will be to highlight the roles of strong and prominent female characters and other minor characters in the Bible, in our sermons, in our Sunday school teachings, and other messages. Barak was an army general who served under Deborah, a judge and a prophetess. Men who feel belittled because they serve under women should have a change of mindset. For example, while they will give a male pastor all the respect his office demands and call him Domini, a female pastor is sometimes nothing to them but sister. You know, the way we use language matters at the end of the day. Do we use language in subtle ways to empower or disempower women in the church today? Do we use language to promote gender exclusion in church leadership and administration? Third, traditional and naive interpretations of scriptures need to be censored and new gender-conscious interpretations be encouraged. For example, the theology of headship and submission should give way to a theology of partnership and equality that recognizes and treats women as created equally in the image of God. The text remains the church's primary theological resource. If the Bible has been used to foster patriarchal agendas, then the same Bible could be used today to promote gender justice and equity in our congregations by rereading with open mind, with new lenses, including gender lens. Fourth, since at the heart of patriarchy lies the disproportionate distribution of power, the church and church leadership must consciously seek fresh ways to ensure even sharing of executive power, not just to reflect inclusiveness, but gender parity. Patriarchy thrives with the support of powerful institutions. The church, as one of such institutions, could help neutralize its power. Thank you.
Dr. Funlola, thank you very much for your very helpful and challenging presentation to us today. And colleagues, I wonder if you don't want to join me just in offering a virtual hand of thanks to our two presenters this morning. Thank you very much for your preparation and for both challenging and inviting us into a theological space for discussion. Now, friends, you'll see that Dr. Malkoto, our colleague, is not here to chair the discussion. Funlola, what you might not have noticed while you were speaking is that Eskom has just announced that level 2 load shedding will begin. And that means that at 12 noon today, our electricity will go out here in Stellenbosch. So Sipho is driving to his home so that when the power goes out, we will have someone who has electricity and internet access to welcome all of you. I do know that Professor Pint, who is one of our Bible study leaders, is in Germany, and I do think they have slightly more reliable internet access, so our Bible study will go ahead as planned. But colleagues, we now have an opportunity, Jeremy, thank you. We now have an opportunity for us to enter into some discussion. And we have about 30 minutes or so, if I'm not mistaken, on the program to be able to just give some reflection and some engagement with our two sessions from this morning. And so what I would like to do is I'd like to invite you just to take a moment where you are seated. Maybe you are in an office or in your home, in a church building, and don't be uncomfortable with the silence, even the online silence. I want to invite you, just take a moment and let's just think, what was the one thing that struck you from Reverend Fumba's presentation. Just if you can just think of one thing that struck you, one thing perhaps that you heard more clearly for the first time, one thing that perhaps left you uncomfortable or challenged you. Just make a note of that if you can, write it down somewhere or make a note of it in your mind. Let's do the same with Funlola's presentation. Dr. Olojede, let's just think, what was the one thing that struck you there? One theological insight, one concern about justice, nature of God. Okay, colleagues, let's open our conversation now. Dr. Olojede, I would like to begin with you, Funlola. You listened to Reverend Fumba's presentation. Do you perhaps have anything that struck you as you listened to him, either today or in the two previous presentations that you might like to share? And then while you're busy speaking, I'm going to ask the other colleagues. Friends, you are welcome either to raise your hand if you would like to speak or to type your comment in the comment box, and we will give you an opportunity to speak. But Funlola, let's begin with you. What struck you? Was there anything that you thought about or heard in that session?
Yeah, I mentioned this at the beginning of my presentation. Well, when he said that he was admitting or confessing that he's a beneficiary of patriarchy, and he continues to be a beneficiary of patriarchy. And that struck me that I have not benefited anything from patriarchy. I've been on the wrong side of patriarchy, of the effects of patriarchy in the church and in society. So that makes him a privileged person, and more privileged than I am in that sense. And if he's representing the male folk, then and I'm kind of representing the female folk, then it means that we are not benefiting anything from patriarchy. So patriarchy should go. Then it talks about stereotypes, which are real, and these stereotypes continue. But I will just take it a little further that most of these stereotypes are promoted from home. It's the socialization, is the way we, when we have our little children and the little girl is crying, the little boy is crying, so no, men don't cry. You are the man in this house, even though the boy is a 3-year-old. And we're already fostering those stereotypes. We're already reinforcing them. And so by the time that little boy grows up to become a man, then he sees women as those ones that cry. I am not supposed to cry, So society continues to perpetuate those gender stereotypes, and but everybody's guilty of that, including women, because women are the mothers at home who say, "Oh, pinky is for the girl, and then the blue is for the boy," and chores, the genderized chores at home. The girl would do this. Oh, you don't play with that toy, you play with this. You don't do. So they buy guns for the boy and scooters and big toys that make a lot of noise and give them a lot of energy. And then the girl must play with Barbie, and then must they buy her small teacups and kettles. She knows how to prepare tea already, even at age 4. So we reinforce those stereotypes, every single one of us, and it's high time that we started to deconstruct our minds and to do things differently, and that when those who are little now grow up, society would already become a better place. Even if we are gone, it doesn't matter anymore. But we know we have done something that will leave society a better place. Thank you.
Lola, thank you. Thank you for that. I see Dr. Marlene Malkoto, you've raised your hand. Marlene, please feel free to unmute and switch on your camera if you're comfortable to do so. We'd love to hear your question or comment.
Thank you so much, Dion, and thank you also to speakers. It was really very interesting. I would like to just make a few remarks. I found, or maybe I should first say that I am a minister in a congregation, and so I do have the experience and the exposure about what was said this morning. But I would also like to from my experience, say that I have found that a theology of presence really changes the perceptions of people out there. And I see this in my own church. When people talk about female ministers, some people are still very surprised that women would want to go into this. And I look at my children. My children are surprised that people don't see that women can be a minister, because that is the experience that they have, having a mother and a father in the household who are ministers. The young children, especially the young girls in my congregation, they look at me with different eyes. They come to me and they say, I'm so happy. Now I know I can also go because you showed me. So those examples are so necessary and are so powerful. And I think it will change, even if as women we don't say anything, just that presence, it will make a change. Funlola talked about the gender stereotypes, which is so true. And I think as mothers and fathers, or maybe I should say caregivers, because our family structures are very different these days. As caregivers, we really have, we need to make the changes in the house. We need to make sure that our young boys and our young girls know the responsibilities in a household. That washing dishes is not just for girls. And sweeping the garage is not just for boys. It's equal. The load should be shared equally. And what I so loved about Funlola's presentation this morning, the practical examples that she gave us, cleaning a toilet, making tea at a meeting. These things are overlooked because it's normal. Men see it as being normal. It's not normal. And in most cases, some women are shy to talk about it. And I think really men also need to have this responsibility to speak out about these injustices which are taking place. Another example that I want to point out, Funlola also talked about the fact that in our tradition, when we get married, our father hands us over to the family. And I am so blessed that my family has done it differently. My mother also did that role. So, I'm really blessed because in our family, things are done differently. So I get the other side of the picture, and it makes it easier. The thing that Reverend Fumba said that really gave me heart palpitations was when he said that patriarchy should be declared as a sin. And I got heart palpitations when I was thinking of our South African context. And if we look at the different cultures in South Africa, where men are holding on to their power roles. And, that will just cause havoc in the country. Much needed, but I think we need courageous conversations to lead us on that road. So that was my contribution. Thank you. No particular question. I just wanted to share. And thank you so much for Funlola and also for Reverend Fumba. I really enjoyed your contributions. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Doc, thanks very much for that. Yeah, just to add perhaps to what I hear from Marlene is this notion that, you know, think about it, when women marry, they even give up a sense of their identity. They take on the husband's surname, and in some cultures even give up their own family and are initiated into their husband's culture. But also that, by the way, was the one thing that struck me, is that we should declare patriarchy a sin. We've been able to declare other sins clearly, but why are we so reticent to do it with this one? You know, we need that revolution. Reverend Gondwe, I see your hand. Reverend Gondwe, please go ahead, unmute your microphone, and then go ahead. And Toboho, I see your hand. We'll have you up after Reverend Gondwe. Please go ahead. John, you might just have to unmute your microphone and switch on your camera. There we hear you.
Yes, sir. Let me introduce myself first. I am Reverend John Gondwe, an ordained minister in a Presbyterian church here in Malawi. Currently, I am a student, a PhD student, studying with Anita Kluter. I was just there last month. I just arrived back home a couple of weeks ago. So she's the one who gave me this link. So because what I'm studying is a little bit linked with the gender issues. So I want just to thank the two presenters, Reverend Fumba and our old friend, Funlola, Dr. Funlola, for nice presentation. Well, just to be quick, what has struck me most is the definition of gender, particularly the social construct. If you also look at the culture, in other ways, I can't give a full definition, but it also has an element of social construct in it. Something that we're born in, we learn, we grow up in culture, having the do's and don'ts, the taboos and all these things, the way of living. So it's something that it deals with the mindset of a person. So equally to gender. So when we talk about the religion, Christianity, where we are a church, the church comes later on top of the culture and the social construction already done. So those people who are promoting patriarchal using the biblical text, especially Genesis, God created God as a man. I liked Funlola what she said. Where was the apostle, these church fathers, where were the church mothers then? So I think those people were interpreting this scripture from this background of the social construct. So now we are in a church context. We are now fighting against this thing. In other words, it's more or less that we are fighting against the mindset of people who have been made to think like that. People have been made to look at issues in that way, using those lanes of being in a culture, of being in a patriarchal culture, and all those things. So now, forget about the biological issues. Let us concentrate on the gender and the patriarch and the culture in the church. I remember it took about 11 years for my church in Malawi to start ordaining women after they have trained several women in theological schools. But to ordain them, it took 11 years. So they were just given other jobs because they can't do this, they can't do it. But finally, we managed. But we still have another Presbyterian church in Malawi that is still resisting to ordain women. We are three main churches in Malawi, the southern part, the central, and the northern. We from the north have accepted, the south have accepted, but the central region the Nkoma Synod is still resisting. When we look deep into the reasons they are giving, you see that they are grounded in culture. Understand? The culture does not, their culture is very strong. But what's strange is that it's a multi-linear culture as well. It's a mix of matrilineal and multicultural, something like that. But they are resisting to ordain women because of the culture. I'm looking at it as a social construct. So now, if you want to achieve we want to fight against the patriarchal in the church, I don't know how best we can do it. But the best way is to deal with the mindset first. I don't know. What came to people first between the religion and the culture? It is the culture that came first to people. Religion came later. So now if the religion wants to address this thing, it has to deal with the mindset of people, the culture of people in which they were born in. So it's something very sensitive and very critical, because when we say, now I am a born-again Christian, right? In African perspective, where I come from, I am a born-again Christian, which means in some people, if you're a born-again Christian, you want to practice your Christianity in line with your faith, which means you have to abandon. Does it mean you have to abandon your culture? So,
John, let's wrap up your feedback just so we can give some others a chance, please. So if I can give you just half a minute just to conclude your thought, and then we will give some others a chance.
Yes, my summary is we have to explore how best we can brainwash people's minds about their culture. That's the only way we can achieve this thing. One way addition. As long as they are still in their culture, we'll still be wrestling with this issue. Yeah, that's my comment.
John, thank you. And thanks so much for joining us all the way from Malawi. I remember seeing you just in front of the faculty just before you left. And thanks for joining us today. Dr. Olojede, I'm going to give you a chance to respond in a moment, but I wonder if we can take another question. I see Tebogo Sewapa, our colleague, has his hand raised. So maybe if we can ask him also to give us his input, and then Doc, I'll come back to you. Tebogo, please, the floor is yours. You can unmute your mic and your camera if you are able to do so. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Prof. I don't know if I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I cannot unmute my mic due to some arrangements where I am now. I take this opportunity and thank both Reverend Pumba and also Dr. Funlola for the paper, the presentation. Myself, actually, I may regard myself as a gender activist, especially for the rights of the LGBTIQ community, the advocacy and so on. So I will speak from the queer perspective, based on what I've discovered, during the presentation. Firstly, from Reverend Pumba's presentation, actually, I was very, very interested, in the point that he made that actually patriarchy or patriarchal ideologies are seen as a stronghold in church and in society, especially in Africa, and how he was groomed from that culture of patriarchy, from onset, and how he was managed, to break into other grounds, like become a feminist, which is a very, very actually something that's very, very good, and also because when I listened to when I was listening to Dr. Pumba, actually, just briefly, I was very interested from the queer perspective because, like recently, you may have realized now in the media news now, there's a very, very controversial issue that is going on in Zimbabwe, whereby one of the most famous South African gay TV personalities has been banned in the country because the churches has raised a petition to the president Mnangagwa, the president of Zimbabwe, that this particular personality who is homosexual, according to the constitution of Zimbabwe, that doesn't tolerate homosexuality. Therefore, they cannot allow him in Zimbabwe because spiritually this will disturb a lot of people. And then it will also show that Zimbabwe's perception, the LGBT community, that is going to affect their children. So what hit me is that, how the church plays role in terms of advocating the exclusion, for example, of women and also the queer people in the society. Like, I was very, very actually to say that, it's very interesting to see that, we have this kind of dialogues. Also, how Dr. Funlola also mentioned about the gender stereotype that, the church and culture has brought together. That stereotypes how men must behave, or how children, males must behave, and how female children must behave, and how the church fathers sexually came into being in the church, whereby the church mothers were excluded. So the language that is used, in the whole of our theological development, I believe that, it needs to be changed. Because honestly speaking, even from the queer society, there's a really serious challenge, and always we point a figure, that, our churches, like myself as a Christian from the Pentecostal background, I know that our churches really, they need to do more in order to try to understand the lived experiences of people who are different, people who are lesbian and gay, or people who are like women who cannot be ordained. Because there are some churches, for example, even in Africa, whereby women cannot be ordained into ministry. I can talk of the famous church in Africa like the ZCC, and other churches like the Shembe, the African Initiated Churches, whereby women cannot stand in a ministry. So as the society evolves now, we just have to come with a new way of doing things. I believe I'm not in a state of proposing that, but I'm just grateful for this kind of conversation that, really there's somewhere where I believe we're going. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you so much, Teboho, and of course also for introducing the intersectional nature of patriarchy, that it reaches beyond just what some would consider the two binary genders, but the patriarchy also enacts itself in harmful ways upon persons who have a sexual identity and a gender identity, which may not necessarily fit those categories neatly. So thank you for introducing that. Doc Funlola, what response or input do you have? Please go ahead.
Yeah, for Reverend Gondwe, who was talking about culture, not that he asked any particular question, it was a remark, but I would agree with him that culture has a strong influence over what is happening in the church, and that if we would be able to have any headway in this regard, then the mindset of people have to change. So we cannot say people should discard their culture. That would be wrong. But then what we could do is what are the toxic elements in culture, and how can we redeem those elements if they are redeemable? And if they are not redeemable, how can we jettison them in a way that there will not be tension, but there will be harmony between culture and our religion? So I think that's important, and that burden rests on the shoulder of ministers. Really, it depends on how we communicate these things in our preaching, in our teaching, in our daily interactions with the people. And when we, on grassroots levels, when we do outreach programs, how do we communicate these things? So we need wisdom in this kind of direction, because the gospel is not, the aim of the gospel is not to fight culture, because it's people own culture. So if you're fighting culture, like in an open confrontation, you are fighting the people. So what rather we need is a way to make people see with new lenses, and to say, okay, oh, there's danger in this. If I go in this direction, oh, the danger is that somebody else will be affected negatively. So then maybe I change from that direction and go in a new way. So I think that that is what is helpful. I think the other comment is directed at Reverend Sukisa. I'm not sure he's in here. He's not in the meeting. Oh, okay. So I wasn't following too well, but I know that you were asking about what happens to those who have a different sexual orientation. I think different churches, you know, this is an evolving thing now, because if you take the church 50 years ago, such issues did not arise, even maybe 30 years ago. But now those issues arise, and many churches are still struggling, you know, to grapple with the implications of these things. For me, I would say that people should find a place where they are accepted, where they are welcome, because you do not want to say, I will forcefully remain in a place where I'm not loved, where I'm not wanted. And that's why we have different denominations, we have different doctrines, and people are just free to go into a space where, because you may want to change a particular space, and you find yourself, you are just swimming against the tide every day, and you may not live to see the fruit of such. So if you choose what you want, if it's that, okay, my goal is to change the space where I am, and then you stay there and you endure whatever is thrown at you, knowing that your goal is to make a change. But if your goal is to fellowship and to have peace of mind and not necessarily to fight people, then you can find a space where you're welcome and you are made to feel at home. That would be my take on that.
Thanks, Doc, for that very helpful engagement, and even for engaging, you know, slightly outside of your own presentation. We know, of course, that you have expertise in all of these areas, but thanks for doing that. I see Mr. Koch on the chat has added a comment. Colleague, you're more than welcome to speak to us if you'd like to. Just unmute your microphone, and by all means, you're welcome to read your comment to us. Let's just see there. I don't see you unmuting, so let me read your comment. Patriarchy does not only affect the person individually, but also the community at large. At the end of the day, we are all a community in Christ who shares in the love and hope that he spreads amongst us, and which we should then spread through our own life and ministry at large. I think that's a very helpful comment for us. And I think, Dr. Olojede, one of the points that I hear you addressing is that very often it is the very church that is the site of struggle. The ways in which people read the Bible. For example, often with my undergraduate students, I say to them, okay, can you describe for me what God looks like? What is your image of God, our parent? And it's very often these patriarchal images, you know, the old man with a beard sitting on a throne. I wonder if you don't want to perhaps comment a little bit on that, the challenge of the church and even the Bible that we hold so dearly being the site of struggle for patriarchy.
Well, I like the way you put it, that the church itself is a site of struggle, just like scholars have identified that the text is a site of struggle. So now you have struggle meeting struggle. That's what we, you know, because in the church now there is it's a melting pot for the patriarchy that is coming from outside and the patriarchy that is coming from the text. Now, when these two merge in the church, as I said in my presentation, then you find that the influence of patriarchy in the church is actually now stronger than the influence of patriarchy outside the church, where only culture holds sway in many respects. But now in the church, as an institution that has a patriarchal tradition itself and a patriarchal text, then merging that with the patriarchy from the culture, then there is definitely a struggle here. And I would just want to say that if I can extend your metaphor, Professor Dion, that life itself is a site of struggle. It's a site of struggle. It's a lot of balancing we need to do every day. There is no life that is just so straightforward that things are just thoroughly bad or negative, or things are just smooth all the way from the beginning to the end of life. It's a site of struggle. And if we negotiate that in individual lives, that negotiation too, that's what we need to do in church. But many times we are overly critical of what is happening in church because we forget that the people who constitute church, their own lives also are sites of struggle. So when you bring all these struggles together in one space, there's going to be more struggle. So if we negotiate in our own individual lives and somehow we find strength daily to keep moving, to keep pushing, and to keep striving to get better and attain something somehow, we can adopt the same when it comes to church rather than just condemnation, criticism, especially of leaders. They are not this, they are not that. They have to negotiate a lot of issues that are beyond them as individuals, and we need to understand that also. So, but I thank you for bringing in that metaphor. I think it succinctly captures what we are doing even today. Thank you.
Thank you. Doc, thanks for that feedback. And just to say, Andre, colleague Miller, I see your hand, but we are out of time for this session. And so I'm going to invite you, please, Andre, just hang on to your comment. There will be a lot of opportunity for conversation and discussion and engagement as we move into the Bible study session, the contextual Bible reading session for this afternoon. I just want to mention, before I thank our presenters for this morning, that our colleague Teboho in the chat, again, pointing out for us that very often this interplay between the church and the state, between our religious beliefs and how that becomes legislated policy, is also something that we have to think about. So, Dr. Olojede, I'm reminded of that statement that the personal is political, and the political is personal. That these boundaries between private and public tend to be quite porous. What happens in public life often flows into our private lives, but also the way in which we raise our children, live in our homes, worship in our congregations. That often bleeds into society. So. Thank you for introducing us so richly to this very important topic, and we do pray that the church would be willing, have the courage indeed to engage in this struggle, and that we'll work for a more just, Christ-honoring dispensation, both within the church and in society. So colleagues, can I ask you, please, let's give a hand of thanks to Dr. Olojede and to our colleague, Reverend Fumba. Thank you for your inputs today. We are now going to take a short break. It's 47 minutes past, and we're going to take a quick comfort break. Grab yourselves a cup of coffee. At 12 noon, Professor Jeremy Pint will kick off together with Babalwa Sifuba in our contextual Bible reading. Jeremy has mentioned our power goes out at 12 here at the Faculty of Theology. We hope that Sipho by then will be online from home. But if he is not, please can you take, he is there. Sipho, thanks. Well done. You drove quickly and carefully. So we will be in your hands. So see you all at 12 noon. Have a good break. Thanks, colleagues.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ref Titimani, how are you?
Hayi kusekuhle noko mkhonzi siyabulela.
Yebo.
Kanjani kwelo cala?
Kuhle man. You Western Cape, it's a little bit cloudy, but it's yeah, it's nice. It's nice.
That's good.
Yeah. I think the colleagues are back. Jeremy, are you here? And Rev Sifuba? We can't start without
I'm
you.
here.
We can't start without you. Can I see your face, Rev Sifuba? We haven't seen you since when?
Sunday.
Since Sunday.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm not too sure if you can see me because I cannot see anyone, but I can hear everyone for a change. But I don't think I cannot see the pictures, but I'm glad I can hear the voices. It will be a problem if I don't hear the voices.
I see that your audio is a bit scratchy, the voice, but I think as we go along, we'll get it right. Colleagues, we have now almost some time to really work on a contextual Bible reading. I was thinking while Dion was saying that we will take a break, that we request all of you to have your Bibles close to you, because now we will work with the Bible, because we are entering a phase where we'll do the contextual Bible reading, looking at the scriptures on all levels, on all angles, so to speak. I want to present to you Reverend Babalo Sifuba, who is a minister of the Uniting Reformed Church in Southern Africa, but she's also working for Witness Ministry of the Dutch Reformed Church family in the Cape region, working with Reverend Stephen Pedro. Then together with Reverend Babalo Sifuba, we have Professor Jeremy Penn, a minister readings as well today, not only New Testament. they will really tap into some of the Old Testament verses and New Testament. We'll see how it goes. But colleagues, I want to welcome you at this session. It's a very nice and long session. We will continue to be engaging you, and don't keep us sleeping, because I know when people are listening, then they don't really want to participate, or when they are listening, they don't want to participate. Keep us awake so that you pinpoint and say, Lux, you haven't said anything. Please read these passages and so on, so that we are awake as usual. This is a very nice session that we'll be dealing with you, and it's a very challenging one. Welcome to both of you, and over to you. It's 3 minutes past 12. Thank you for time.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Mawakoto. I like what you just said, because from our point of departure, immediately we hear how it is important for the interaction between the participants. I mean, how it is important to have discussions, because CBR, it is a communal activity. It is something we do together. And also another point that is important, it is that we have an opportunity of openly discussing the text and also the themes that we see as important in the text. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
We can hear you.
Okay, and also if it was a different setting or in a different circumstance, we would have small groups where we can actually continue discussing and see what's important, or how do we see things differently in a smaller group. But now we are in this setting, so we'll just open the group and just discussed it as a wider group. Another thing, when we're doing CBR, we're working with the different worlds of the text. We work with the socio-historical context of the text. We work with the text as it is, and also we work with what we have in front of the text, or how do we receive the text as a reader. That's what we mainly do when we're doing this contextual Bible reading. That is our point of departure. So I'll give over to Professor Brent to continue.
Thank you very much, Babalwa, and thank you very much also, Sipho, for the introductions. I see you nodding, so I take it you can hear me well, and then everybody else can.
We hear you clearly.
And the screen is sharing as well.
Start, Jeremy, are you still in Germany?
Yeah, I am. I'm talking to you from Heidelberg. Yeah.
When are you in the Netherlands? Is it this week or next week?
Next week.
Okay. You may continue.
Thank you. The screen is also sharing well. You can get that? Was great. Good, folks. And then just in we'll make our connections as we work through the text as well. But just from my side also, it is I want to link onto what Babalwa has already said. It's really great to be with you and looking forward to our discussions. And so, as Babalwa said, we're going about this in terms of a contextual Bible reading. So this may not be quite a way in which one would have done this, maybe in a lecture on New Testament studies, in the second year or the third year or whatever. So what we are all about is trying to understand the text by using three relatively simple, but do not be mistaken, simple but nevertheless very taxing ways in which to go about the text. So first we're just going to talk about what we see, what do we find in the text. And then we're going to move one step further and say, but okay, so what do we make about this? I mean, what are we to take from this? Sort of the judge part. And then we are going to come to a very important part as well, something that's been alluded to earlier this morning already, is what are we going to do about it? There's been suggestions this morning already that given the nature of patriarchy and given the prevalence and also the widespread and very heavy impact on our societies, on our communities, that we need to act. So we're going to share some ideas also about what we can do, and particularly in our own communities. Sometimes we need to think bigger as well, and we got to take up our banners and march in the street. But sometimes we also need to begin at a very practical level in our own houses, in our own church communities, in our own civil communities as well. So the first part in, when we talk about a C, we're going to talk about our consciousness of what we experience in the text. We're going to try and describe what we experience, how it resonates with us. In the second part, we're going to do the bit more critical thing and say, but okay, so why is this like this? What do we think? What is the text all about? What does the text want to achieve? And of course, then in the final part, we're going to return to the community consciousness and going to say, okay, so we're back at where we started from, but so what now? So if you really want to translate that also into the terms that you may have heard also in class at some stage, we're going to talk about what happens in front of the text. Then we're going to go a little bit behind the text and also focus on the text, in the text itself. And then we're going to go back to in front of the text. And in front of the text, of course, is where we are at. And then maybe just another word, and then I'm going to return again to Babalwa. So just to give you another way of summarizing this, just so that you have it all there. I'm not going to read through that. You see it all on the screen. But so contextual Bible reading is a bit different from an academic study of the Bible. Not to say that academic study excludes contextual, or to say that contextual excludes academic or intellectual work. I mean, we're still thinking we are talking about as we want to interrogate us. But contextual Bible study is a little bit different in the sense that it starts from our own reality, our experiences, and also our resources. And then we want to return to that point as well. So we start with community consciousness, and we want to return also to community consciousness, but we want to do this journey while we walk, as it were, through the biblical text. And therefore we're going to be touching on thematic, on literary, on socio-historical, and also the broader semiotic. What do these things mean? We're going to focus on all of those components. Folks, that's it in short. So I'm going to give back to Babalwa. She wants to talk a little bit more about the objectives.
Yes, thank you, Prof. The fundamental objectives of contextual Bible readings are to read the Bible in community. As we said, it is a communal reading of the Bible, and also to read the Bible in context, the situations that we are in, like at the present moment, and also to read the Bible critically, collaboratively. And the whole thing of reading the Bible this way, it is for us to change. It is for change and also to celebrate. Once we read the Bible together, we learn different things about the text, and also that brings to our context. Now we will be reading from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 to 17. I'm going to have to ask people to read out loud here. Any volunteers who would love to read for us? We have 3 texts that we'll be looking at. Any volunteers? No one wants to read the Bible with us. Okay, nonetheless, I would ask Reverend Titimani, if you don't mind reading for us the first part, which is 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11 to 17. Are you there? Anyone?
There is another hand, Rev Sifuba, Reverend Siwapa is also willing to read.
Okay. Can I also have the voice of the ladies? Do we have any women in the group?
Yes,
okay.
we've got Reverend Marlene Maokoto. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask to read for us that last part, which is 1 Peter chapter 3 to 7, verse 1 to 7. So I'm going to give over to Reverend Titimani to read for us, and then the other person can follow, and so we go. Thank you.
All right. Sorry, I was just out for a minute. My wife was leaving, so I had to go and close the gate. Where do I start reading?
You start reading at 1 Peter 2, verse 11, and you only read 1 Peter 2, verse 11 to 17.
Thank you. 1 Peter 2. Dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in the word to abstain from the sinful desires which war against your soul. Live such good lives amongst the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, or they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see good deeds and glorify God on the day of his visits. Submit yourself to the Lord's sake to every authority instituted amongst the men, whether to the king, the supreme authority, or to the governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talking to the foolish man. Live as a free man, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up of evil. Live as a servant of God. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the brotherhood of believers, and fear God and honor the king. Yes, I think I read up until 17.
Thank you, Reverend Titimani. Can we get the next person to read the following verses, please?
Okay. First Peter chapter 2, verse 18 to 25 reads, "Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but to the harsh. For this is commendable if, because of conscience towards God, one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what credit is it if, when you are beaten for your fault, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example, that you shall follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously, who himself bore our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, having died to sins, might live for righteousness, by whose stripes you were healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls." I think it's finished there.
1 Peter 3, verse 1 to 7. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers.
Thank you very much, folks, for the readings. It is a text that all of us probably already know and have probably often heard before, but we want to hear it out loud, of course, because that also helps us when we understand, when we think about it. So, folks, I'll be with you for the next few moments or so while we're talking about C and the judge part of the text, and then I'm also going to hand back then again to Babalwa. As you've noted, we share the interaction, the facilitation. So, folks, let's open up a little bit of discussion. You've heard Sipo's request. Dr. Makoto has asked us to all be alert and not to drowse off. So when you hear this text, it's a rich text, it's a full text. We're going to focus on 1 Peter 3, 1 to 7. That's the last part that Marlene read to us. But in